Okay, so but when we think about 19th century imperialism, we usually think about the way that Europe turned Africa from this into this. The so-called scramble for Africa. Speaking of scrambles and the European colonization of Africa, you know what they say, sometimes to make an omelet you gotta break a few eggs. And then sometimes you break a lot of eggs and you don't get an omelet. Europeans had been involved in Africa since the 16th century when the Portuguese used their cannons to take control of cities on coast to set up their trading post empire. But in the second half of the 19th century, Europe suddenly and spectacularly succeeded at colonizing basically all of Africa. Why? Well, the biggest reason that Europeans were able to extend their grasp over so much of the world was the same reason they wanted to do so in the first place: industrialization. Nationalism played its part, of course. European states saw it as a real bonus to be able to say that they had colonies, so much so that a children's rhyme in an ABC for baby patriots went, "C is for colonies, rightly we boast, that of all the great countries, Great Britain has the most." But it was mostly, not to get all Marxist on you or anything, about controlling the means of production. Europeans wanted colonies to secure sources of raw materials, especially cotton, copper, iron, and rubber, that were used to fuel their growing industrial economies. And in addition to providing the motive for imperialism, European industrialization also provided the means. Europeans didn't fail to take over territory in Africa until the late 19th century because they didn't want to. They failed because they couldn't. This was mostly due to disease. Unlike in the Americas, Africans weren't devastated by diseases like smallpox because they'd had smallpox for centuries and were just as immune to it as Europeans were. Not only that, but Africa had diseases of its own, including yellow fever, malaria, and sleeping sickness, all of which killed Europeans in staggering numbers. Also, Nagana was a disease endemic to Africa that killed horses, which made it difficult for Europeans to take advantage of African grasslands, and also difficult for them to get inland because their horses would die as they tried to carry stuff. Also, while in the 16th century Europeans did have guns, they were pretty useless, especially without horses, so most fighting was done the old-fashioned way, with swords. That worked pretty well in the Americas, unless you were the Incas or the Aztecs, but it didn't work in Africa, because the Africans also had swords, and spears, and axes. So as much as they might have wanted to colonize Africa in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, Africa's mosquitoes, microbes, and people were too much for them. So what made the difference? Technology. First, steamships made it possible for Europeans to travel inland, bringing supplies and personnel via Africa's navigable rivers. No horses? No problem. Even more important was quinine medicine, sometimes in the form of tonic water mixed into refreshing, quintessentially British gin and tonics. Quinine isn't as effective as modern anti-malarial medication, and it doesn't cure the disease, but it does help moderate its effects. But of course, the most important technology that enabled Europeans to dominate Africa was guns. By the 19th century, European gun technology had improved dramatically, especially with the introduction of the Maxim machine gun, which allowed Europeans to wipe out Africans in battle after battle. Of course, machine guns were effective when wielded by Africans too, but Africans had fewer of them. Oh, it's time for the open letter? And my chair is back! An open letter to Hiram Maxim. But first, let's see what's in the secret compartment today. Oh, it's Darth Vader. What a great reminder of imperialism. Dear Hiram Maxim, I hate you. It's not so much that you invented the Maxim machine gun, although obviously that's a little bit problematic, or even that you look like the poor man's Colonel Sanders. First off, you're a possible bigamist. I have a long-standing opposition to bigamy. Secondly, you were born an American, but then became a Brit, thereby metaphorically machine gunning our founding fathers. But most importantly, among your many inventions was the successful amusement park ride, the captive flying machine. Mr. Maxim, I hate the captive flying machine. The captive flying machine has resulted in many a girlfriend telling me that I'm a coward. I'm not a coward, I just don't want to die up there. It's all your fault, Hiram Maxim, and nobody believes your story about the light bulb. Best wishes, John Green. All right, so here is something that often gets overlooked. European imperialism involved a lot of fighting and a lot of dying. And when we say that Europe came to dominate Africa, for the most part, that domination came through wars, which killed lots of Africans and also lots of Europeans, although most of them died from disease. It's very, very important to remember that Africans did not meekly acquiesce to European hegemony. They resisted, often violently, but ultimately they were defeated by a technologically superior enemy. In this respect, they were a lot like the Chinese and also the Indians and the Vietnamese, and you get the picture. So by the end of the 19th century, most of Africa and much of Asia had been colonized by European powers. I mean, even Belgium got in on it, and they weren't even a country at the beginning of the 19th century. I mean, Belgium has enjoyed like 12 years of sovereignty in the last 3 millennia.